rain was relentless. It hammered my rooftop long after midnight, and I stood there, gripping a flashlight, peering through the kitchen window at a sight that made my chest tighten with alarm. Several flash beams flickered near the foot of the slope, down by the place where my hand-built dam once stood strong. But it wasn't standing anymore. It was gone. I blinked. My heart thumped heavily. Why were these people gathered there? Then a name came to mind. HOA. A swirl of dread settled in my stomach, as I realized something catastrophic had happened, and it all pointed back to that group. No one else in this area had the audacity to tamper with a structure so essential, and now the unstoppable weather was about to reveal the gravity of their meddling. I snatched my coat. I tugged on boots that were still crusted with yesterday's mud, then charged outside into the driving rain. My property was perched on a gentle rise overlooking the rest of the neighborhood. At first, I didn't see the true extent of the damage, but with each step closer, the devastation became undeniable. Where I had meticulously designed an earthen dam, there was only a ragged breach. Loose rock littered the ground like broken teeth. Wet clay and splintered timbers were all that remained of my containment wall. The pounding storm was feeding water into that gash, sending it downhill in a noisy rush. I inched forward, my teeth clenched, body shivering from the damp cold and from anger. Barely 2 hours earlier, I had heard mechanical noises. I'd assumed it was someone's generator or perhaps a passing truck. Now I realized it must have been heavy equipment. My dam was wiped out. My mind raced. Why would the HOA do something so foolish and in the middle of a massive rain event? Karen, the newly elected head of the local homeowners association, had a reputation for forging her own rules. She stuck her nose into everyone's business. I'd heard rumors about her but never realized how far she'd go. The repeated warnings she sent me had been bizarre enough. Though I had county permits, she kept insisting that my dam violated community aesthetic standards. Evidently, she refused to accept that my property wasn't under direct HOA control. Her meddling had reached a terrifying new level. I took a few steps closer to the soaked remains of my creation. That's when I spotted a sign. It was plastered on a stake hammered crookedly into the ground. Its lamination shone under my flashlight beam. A heading read, "Removal Notice, Oak Glen HOA," with an official-looking seal below it. I moved the light across the words. Unauthorized structure removed by order of the board. There was no mention of the local county offices or the environmental agency. This was purely an HOA initiative. I let out a low, bitter laugh. It was either that or scream into the night. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I realized I had missed calls, likely from neighbors who lived downhill. If water broke through in full force, their homes would be in direct danger. My heart sank. I had built this dam to protect them, and me, because the topography here was prone to flash flooding. I trudged back to my house, water pooling in every step, determined to call the authorities. This was beyond personal property damage, this was public endangerment. But first I needed to see if there was any immediate measure I could take. I grabbed a spare flashlight and hopped into my truck. Driving to the lower portion of my property took time. The muddy path was slick, the tires spinning. When I finally pulled up to the ravine where runoff poured toward the main subdivision, my headlights illuminated the swirling brown waters. An ominous river had formed, headed straight for the cluster of houses at the base of the hill. I remembered the many times I had explained to the county inspector and the hydrology consultant. A dam or retention structure up here was critical for controlling seasonal rains. We weren't just dealing with a casual drizzle. In heavy downpours, the runoff could double or triple, overwhelming the old drainage systems in the neighborhood below. I had tried to do the right thing by building the dam. Legally, my permits were all in order. I'd consulted an environmental specialist to ensure it wouldn't harm local wildlife. Everything was above board, except in Karen's eyes. Despite the watery chaos, I tried to see if any leftover portion of the dam could be salvaged or quickly patched, but the destruction was too thorough. It looked like they used an excavator to break apart the retaining wall and haul away chunks of earth and fill. My anger mingled with fear. These HOA members had no concept of how precarious the local geography was. Or perhaps they simply didn't care. My phone vibrated again, and I saw a message from a neighbor. "Water's creeping into our yard. Please help." My frustration burned. I couldn't help them alone. The only thing I could do at this hour was to document everything and brace for the worst. I recorded a short video. Beams of my flashlight danced across the shattered rubble. My voice trembled with a mix of cold and fury. This is what the HOA did. They removed my legally permitted dam. It's raining heavily, and the entire neighborhood could flood. I paused, swallowing hard. "Karen, if you can hear this, you better pray that no one gets hurt." Then I trudged through the mud back to my truck, my boots making angry, squelching sounds. I knew the storm was set to continue, and all I could do was wait until morning to see the full extent of damage. It was a helpless feeling. A primal sense of injustice coursed through me. When the sun finally rose, it revealed a small-scale disaster. Entire sections of the hillside had sloughed off. The once contained water now roared in a wide channel. Down below, in the neat suburban grid that Karen pretended to guard, the roads glistened with standing water. Sewers were backed up. Muddy streams cut across driveways, uprooting shrubs and depositing debris in waves. The HOA members, ironically, were frantic. Their neatly manicured lawns were submerged, and the freshly planted flowers they insisted everyone maintain were swept away in clumps of sludge. As I walked down with a camera slung over my shoulder, I observed residents standing on their porches in dismay, some trying to stop the flow with sandbags. The entire scene felt surreal. A distressed couple approached me, having recognized my truck. They asked whether I had any solutions. I explained that my dam was gone, reduced to a field of rubble overnight. They stood in disbelief. One of them rubbed his forehead and said, "Is this about those letters from the HOA?" I nodded. They claimed I was building an unauthorized water reservoir. They threatened me with fines. The man cursed under his breath. "And now look at us," he muttered, gesturing at the ankle-deep water swirling along the curb. I offered to help set up a makeshift barrier with hay bales if they had any, but it was clear that a single set of bales wouldn't fix the underlying damage. The entire system was compromised. Word spread fast that my dam had been illegally taken down, and blame began to swirl around the community. By midday, the main street in front of Karen's own house was flooded. I saw her standing on her porch, arms folded, her face pale. She wore her usual expression, stern, unyielding. But there was a distinct flicker of panic in her eyes. Whether she realized the magnitude of her mistake or not, I couldn't tell. I just knew that nature was delivering consequences, and she was front and center to receive them. Before the day ended, several anxious homeowners confronted the HOA board. They pounded on the community center door, demanding an explanation. My phone caught a snippet of their outrage. "We didn't sign up for a flood. You told us everything was under control. This is your fault." Some shouted Karen's name, others insisted on seeing the paperwork that authorized the dam's removal. I hung back, partly to stay safe from the mob, partly to gather evidence. Meanwhile, I overheard frightened conversations about cracked foundations, flooded basements, and thousands of dollars in immediate repairs. Later, in a chilling twist, I learned that Karen had tried to deflect blame by claiming the dam was dangerous. She told people she had consulted an expert who said the structure could collapse at any moment. That so-called expert turned out to be her nephew, a landscaper with no engineering credentials. Anger flared again in my gut. This was reckless endangerment, not just petty bureaucracy. What if someone got hurt? My sense of betrayal deepened, yet I felt a strange determination rising. If she wanted a fight, she was about to get one. By dusk, the storm eased, leaving behind a trail of destruction that demanded immediate cleanup. I spent most of the next morning helping neighbors clear mud from their garages. As we shoveled, a few people voiced anger at me, asking why I hadn't warned them more urgently. My chest tightened, but I kept calm. I tried, I replied quietly. I built the dam to protect us. Karen removed it. That statement hung in the air, and eventually folks realized I wasn't the villain. They saw I was working side by side with them, sleeves rolled up, sweat dripping onto the muddy pavement. Slowly, the hostility shifted away from me and back onto the HOA. Specifically Karen, who was conspicuously absent from the cleanup efforts. While I was hauling a wheelbarrow full of silt, an older man named Marcus tapped me on the shoulder. "They need you at the community center," he said, pointing across the flooded street. Apparently, some county officials showed up. I nodded, swallowed, and wiped my forehead. This confrontation was inevitable. I trudged through puddles until I reached the double doors of the building. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed. Several people were huddled around a table stacked with folders, notes, and official documents. Karen was there, posture stiff, hair pulled back in a tight bun. Two county representatives in reflective vests looked weary. They had plastic bags containing site inspection gear, and everything about their posture said, "We've seen enough disasters for a lifetime." Karen's gaze locked on me with an almost physical intensity. "Here he is," she snapped. "He's the one who built an illegal dam and caused all this trouble." My jaw clenched, but I steadied myself. One county official, a man with thick glasses, scanned me from head to toe. "Sir, are you aware of any modifications made on your property that could have impacted the flood patterns?" he asked in a level tone. I nodded calmly. "I built a small earthen retention structure to slow runoff during heavy rain. I have the county permits. I followed environmental guidelines." Karen scoffed. It echoed in the otherwise quiet space. "He's lying," she hissed. "He never got proper approval from the HOA. The official raised a brow. "HOA approval is separate from county permitting," he explained. "If the property is not within the HOA's jurisdiction, then only county or city regulations matter." Karen's eyes flickered with something akin to desperation, but she tried to maintain her composure. "He knows how dangerously flawed that dam was," she insisted. "It could have collapsed on its own." I took a step forward. A small puddle formed at my feet. "It was professionally reviewed by a licensed hydrologist," I said quietly. "The real collapse came after you hired someone to demolish it, without a county inspection." Silence fell. The second county official, a woman with a neat ponytail, cleared her throat. "We have reason to believe the removal of that dam increased flood damage," she said, flipping through a folder. "I'm seeing here that the dam was recorded in our database as a legitimate structure built with a 5-year permit due for renewal next spring." She raised her gaze, eyes scanning Karen. "If you removed it without an official notice or a hearing, that's a serious violation." Karen tried to say something, but only managed a weak stammer. The tension in the room was so thick that people began to shift uncomfortably. At that moment, one of the local news crews peeked through the open door. Cameras flashed. Karen immediately turned away, covering her face with a binder. She looked cornered, a stark contrast to the authoritarian figure who had glared at me from her porch not long ago. I took the opportunity to offer my side of the story in detail. How I started the project after a previous flood nearly destroyed the lower part of the neighborhood, how I consulted my late uncle's engineering advice, how the county had already inspected the site twice and given me a green light. Then I recounted how Karen's letters escalated from petty fines to vague threats, ultimately leading to the dam being torn down at the worst possible time. Murmurs of dismay rippled through the small crowd. Some recorded my statements on their phones, and I knew word would spread quickly. Within a day, the county placed an emergency hold on the HOA's authority to enforce exterior property modifications. That meant Karen and her associates couldn't just wander onto someone's land and declare something unfit or unapproved without official channels. Even so, the damage was done. Water had seeped into basements, roads were crumbling, and the entire flood management of our area was compromised. And to make matters worse, the weather report predicted more rainfall in the coming days. Late that afternoon, while I was back at my partially ruined dam site, a slender figure in a hooded jacket approached me. It was Karen. Her hair was plastered to her forehead, her eyes red-rimmed. She carried a sheath of papers. My muscles tensed. I half expected her to scream or threaten me. Instead, she spoke in a cracked voice. I need your help," she said, barely audible over the gentle patter of rain. My jaw tightened. I stared at her. Help with what? Further demolishing what's left of my land? She shook her head vigorously. No. To fix this. The board is turning against me. Residents are furious. Insurance claims are piling up. I let the silence stretch for a moment. She shuffled awkwardly. I'm not saying I was wrong, she continued, but maybe there was a misunderstanding about how stable your dam was. I wanted to burst out laughing. At the audacity. But I held my tongue. She was desperate, and for the first time I saw a flicker of genuine fear. Misunderstanding? I echoed, voice tight. You lied about my permits. You brought in unlicensed contractors in the dead of night to smash a structure I spent 3 years building. She clenched the papers in her hand. Look, please, the association is on the hook for thousands of dollars in damage claims. Some are pointing the finger at me personally. Others say we should blame you. We can't handle this conflict alone. Can we work out a truce? Maybe come to an agreement about how to manage water flow? I exhaled slowly. My heart hammered in my chest, but a wave of clarity washed over me. Karen was scared of lawsuits, investigations, and possibly a total meltdown of her authority. She wanted me to bail her out. I'll consider discussing a solution, I finally said, but only if you agree that an independent engineering firm does the new assessment, and you foot the bill for any repairs or restoration needed to ensure the neighborhood's safety. Her cheeks colored. That's expensive. I shrugged. So was my dam, and so is repairing everyone's flood damage. She pressed her lips together. Perhaps she realized she had no bargaining power. Eventually, she nodded stiffly. Fine, we'll schedule a meeting with the board. Then she turned, moving through the soggy grass toward the road. My entire body shook with residual anger and adrenaline. It felt surreal that she'd even ask me for help after all that had happened. That night, the wind howled again, and rain pelted my windows. I double-checked my phone, verifying tomorrow's forecast. More storms. I had a sinking feeling that time was running out for a patchwork fix. The slope was compromised, and the old drainage systems in the neighborhood were nearly maxed out. If the rain continued, the next wave of flooding could be catastrophic. I tossed and turned in bed, half expecting to hear sirens or frantic phone calls. For some reason, I kept replaying Karen's trembling words. They weren't quite an apology, but they were enough to reveal her fear. Maybe she wasn't purely evil. Maybe she was just selfish, careless, and deluded by the little power her HOA position granted. Yet those qualities can be just as dangerous as malice. The following morning, I drove to the county offices. My boots left muddy tracks on the polished floor, and I apologized to the front desk clerk. She just sighed. Apparently they'd been dealing with frantic homeowners all week. When I met with the county engineer, I laid everything out. The original design for my dam, the new damage, the potential risk if heavy rain persisted. He took notes. Occasionally he rubbed his temples as though battling a headache. What you had was an essential retention basin, he muttered. Its removal is tantamount to sabotage. We can't just replace it in a day, especially not in this weather. I explained that the HOA was willing to sponsor an independent firm. At least that's what Karen had suggested. The engineer nodded slowly. "Get that in writing," he advised, tapping his pen on the desk, "but we'll do an emergency site visit to see if there's any temporary measure. If the slope is too unstable, we may need to declare part of that subdivision a disaster area." Disaster area. The words made my stomach knot. Houses could be condemned, families forced to relocate, property values destroyed, all because the HOA wanted to assert control over something that wasn't even in their domain. My mind wandered, recalling how fervently Karen once boasted about protecting property values. Now, ironically, her actions threatened to tank them. As I left the office, my phone buzzed with a text from a neighbor. "Any update? People are scared. Some are blaming you, some blame Karen. We need answers." I took a deep breath, typed back, "Meeting the county engineer soon. We'll keep you posted." Then I headed for a coffee shop across the street where I could gather my thoughts. While sipping a too-bitter espresso, I pulled up the drone footage on my laptop, the footage I had taken weeks earlier, showing the dam intact. The difference between then and now was staggering. Before, the water behind the dam was calm, channeled through a series of spillways I'd installed. Now, there was a gully gouged out by torrential flows, flanked by precarious slopes. Further downhill, you could see muddy water swirling through the suburban grid. I tapped my fingers on the table, anxious, aware that time was running short. That evening, Karen called. Her voice had a forced politeness. "We've scheduled a board meeting at the community center tomorrow. Can you attend?" she asked. "The engineering firm will be there, the county as well." I agreed. "But remember, this has to be a real solution, no scapegoating." She responded with an unconvincing, "Of course," then hung up. The next day dawned gray and wet again. The raindrops felt like they'd never stop. I arrived at the community center with a stack of documents under my arm. The place was bustling with anxious residents. Some recognized me. A few greeted me with nods, others glared or avoided eye contact, likely due to confusion about who was truly responsible. I found a seat in the makeshift conference area, facing a long table. On that table sat Karen, two board members I barely knew, a representative from the county engineering department, and a middle-aged man in a crisp blazer, likely from the engineering firm. The tension in the air was palpable. Karen cleared her throat. She attempted a formal posture. "We've called this meeting to address the ongoing crisis. The HOA regrets any property damage experienced by residents during the recent floods." She paused to glance at me. I kept my face neutral. She continued, "We also want to clarify the events surrounding the removal of the dam." That was my cue. I stood up, shuffling the papers in my hands. "First, let me state that this was not a casual backyard project. It was a fully permitted retention structure designed to protect not only my property, but the entire neighborhood below. The fact that it was demolished without county approval is not just an oversight, it's a gross violation of code." Murmurs rustled through the audience. Karen interjected, "We have reason to believe that the dam was structurally unsound, posing a risk." The man in the blazer coughed politely. He adjusted his glasses. "I've reviewed the original engineering reports, and from a preliminary standpoint, it appears the dam was more than adequate for typical seasonal rain. Any structural deficiency would have been minimal compared to the risk of complete removal right before a major storm." He cast a calm but firm look at Karen. "Removing it drastically increased runoff. Consequently, flooding was intensified." A wave of whispering started among the attendees. Cameras flashed here and there. Karen's cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Taking advantage of the moment, I held up a set of aerial photographs. "This is the watershed area. This diagram shows how the dam slowed and diverted the flow, preventing the surge that we're seeing now." Another county official in the audience nodded in agreement. I continued, "What happened after its removal isn't speculation, it's documented reality. People have thousands of dollars in damage. Some folks can't even live in their homes. Karen tried to interrupt with a question about my supposed lack of HOA compliance, but the engineer from the county calmly reminded her that my land sat just outside the official HOA boundary. Her authority was never recognized by municipal law. The tension in her posture was obvious. She had run out of plausible defenses. In the midst of this charged atmosphere, a tall man in a raincoat stepped forward. Someone I recognized from the local sheriff's department. He addressed the crowd, explaining that after reviewing evidence and statements, the authorities considered opening an investigation into potential reckless endangerment. Karen's face went pale. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. The board members looked uneasy, one of them frantically tapping on his phone. I remained silent, letting the scene unfold. Then, as if on cue, thunder rumbled outside. The storm hadn't finished with us. A few minutes later, a county official said we needed to expedite a plan. The next wave of rainfall could come at any time. The engineering firm representative agreed. He proposed an emergency measure, a temporary barrier of sandbags and quick-fill gravel in the old dam's footprint. It wouldn't be perfect, but might reduce immediate flooding. Who's going to pay for that? Karen asked, voice shaky. Without missing a beat, the county engineer replied, the group that removed the existing protective structure should bear the brunt of costs. In other words, the HOA. The silent fury in Karen's eyes was almost tangible, but she couldn't protest. The room was full of witnesses, officials, and evidence stacked against her. She gave a tight nod, and the board members reluctantly agreed. So, for the next few hours, we organized volunteers, trucks of gravel, and tarps. Even some folks who had initially blamed me joined in once they understood the real story. In the pouring rain, we worked side by side, layering sandbags in the gaping breach. The mood was tense but focused. Everyone wanted to prevent more devastation. Karen hovered around with an umbrella, occasionally barking instructions no one followed. At one point, she tried to apologize to me again, but it was half-hearted. She pivoted to complaining that the costs would be enormous, that she was concerned about losing her position. I had little sympathy left. I warned you, I said quietly. You pushed forward anyway. Now everyone is paying the price. Her expression flickered between anger and shame. She marched away, water dripping off her umbrella, returning to the board members who waited near a parked SUV. By late afternoon, we had erected a rudimentary barrier. It wouldn't match the stability of my original dam, but at least it offered some measure of protection. The engineer from the county inspected our work, nodding in approval. We'll still need a permanent solution, he said, but this might hold through the next storm. He looked at me. Your design was a lot more comprehensive. If you ever want to rebuild officially, the county will expedite the permit renewal. I gave a small smile, though deep down, I was exhausted. Physically, mentally, emotionally. Over the next few days, the skies unleashed more rain. Luckily, the temporary barrier held. Some minor flooding still occurred in the lower streets, but it was nowhere near the initial disaster. The news coverage shifted focus. Local stations began calling it the HOA flood, highlighting how the association's meddling had triggered a broader catastrophe. Karen found herself in a firestorm of public criticism. Many board members resigned. Rumors circulated of a class action suit from residents who suffered property damage, claiming the HOA's irresponsible decision was at fault. Amid this chaos, the county's official report was published. It firmly stated that the destruction of a permitted dam performed without legal authorization had directly contributed to the severity of flooding. That sealed Karen's fate. Sponsors withdrew from the HOA's events. Membership fees were withheld by furious homeowners, and investigations into possible corruption or misuse of HOA funds began. I heard whispers that Karen had previously pushed questionable landscaping contracts through, awarding them to relatives at inflated prices. This new fiasco only amplified scrutiny of all her dealings. Meanwhile, a silver lining emerged. Some neighbors who had never spoken to me before offered thanks, while others asked for advice on how to better secure their properties. A sense of community sprouted from the rubble. Yes, people were angry. Some had lost tens of thousands in repairs, but they channeled their frustration into demanding real accountability. A petition circulated to disband or reckless management as the final straw. I added my signature, grateful to see how swiftly public sentiment pivoted once the truth was out. One morning, I woke to find a letter taped to my front door. It was from Karen, evidently delivered before dawn. The note was short, scrawled in shaky handwriting. I never meant for this to happen. I just wanted uniformity and safety for the neighborhood. I'm sorry. At the end, she scribbled a line about stepping down from her role. I stared at that letter, reading it twice. Part of me wanted to crumple it up and toss it into the trash, but I didn't. There was a certain sadness in it. She had gotten so swept up in controlling every aspect of the community that she refused to see reason, and now everything was unraveling. I left the letter on my counter, uncertain how to feel. Did I want an apology? Closure? Or did I just want to move on and rebuild? A week later, a formal notice arrived from the county stating that the HOA had been found liable for damages under local statutes. Certain officers, including Karen, might face individual liability if proven they ordered the removal without county oversight. Potential civil suits loomed. The notice invited me to submit claims for compensation. I gathered my documentation, receipts for construction materials used in the original dam, photos, invoices from the hydrologist, the entire permitting process. The sum was staggering, but the principle of accountability was more important to me than the money. After everything that happened, I wanted a legal precedent that an HOA couldn't just barge in and destroy property under false pretenses. During the subsequent legal proceedings, depositions revealed just how orchestrated the demolition had been. Karen and 2 other board members had voted in a closed session, ignoring dissenting voices. They hired an unlicensed contractor, Karen's nephew, who had minimal equipment but accepted cash under the table to do the job at night, hoping to avoid confrontation. It was also brazen. The hearing became a media spectacle with local news stations camping out. Karen arrived each day appearing haggard, her eyes ringed with fatigue. The arrogance she once wielded was gone. She mostly remained silent while her lawyer tried to frame the dam removal as an emergency measure. When my turn came to testify, I spoke calmly about my background, the motivation behind building the dam, and how I had warned the HOA on multiple occasions. Their own emails were laid bare, revealing Karen's insistence. He can't just build something like that in our neighborhood, ignoring the fact that my property wasn't even under her domain. The judge listened attentively, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. He asked the county officials about the environmental impact, and they confirmed that while the dam was unusual for a suburban area, it was legally permitted and beneficial. In the end, the judge declared the HOA's actions unlawful, and the association was ordered to pay substantial restitution. Karen, personally, was found negligent for initiating the removal without following any recognized procedure. The relief I felt was immense, but it was tinged with the understanding that no court ruling would undo the damage or the stress inflicted on countless families. Still, the outcome sent a resounding message. No one, not even an overzealous HOA president, could trample individual rights and public safety with impunity. As the flood subsided and repairs commenced across the neighborhood, I had a choice. I could pack up and leave, sell my property and never look back. Or I could stay and rebuild, forging a new sense of community with those who chose to remain. My family had lived in this region for generations, and I felt a certain loyalty to the land. So I decided to stay. With the county's assistance and partial restitution from the lawsuit, I set out to restore a more robust dam, redesigned to handle even greater surges of water. Some neighbors volunteered labor, others donated materials. The transformation from animosity to cooperation was remarkable. On the day we began laying the foundation for the new retention structure, people gathered, passing stones and hauling cement. Even the county engineer dropped by, rolling up his sleeves to help. While we worked, an elderly woman from down the road approached me with cookies and coffee. She smiled softly, saying, "I'm sorry I doubted you. And I'm sorry we ever trusted Karen." I accepted her apology with gratitude. The sun emerged from behind the clouds, as if nature itself was offering a small blessing on our reconstruction efforts. When I glanced down the slope, I saw a cluster of vacant houses, families who had chosen to move elsewhere after the floods. For a moment, the weight of it made my heart ache. This conflict had cost more than dollars. It had ruptured lives. A subtle wind rustled through the oaks, carrying the distant hum of hammering as neighbors repaired what they could. I wondered if Karen felt any genuine remorse. I'd heard rumors she listed her property for sale at a steep discount, presumably to cover legal fees. She vanished from public life. Some said she moved to another state to avoid local stigma. A sense of closure washed over me as I secured the final portion of rebar for the new structure. I remembered how uncertain I felt when I first tried to protect the area. Back then I thought the biggest battle would be nature, floods, erosion, the unpredictability of climate. But the real battle turned out to be with human stubbornness and misguided authority. Over time, I learned that nature's fury can be mitigated with well-thought engineering and respect, but human ego is trickier to contain. Over the following months, I poured the same dedication into rebuilding the dam as I had before. Neighbors united, forging a spirit of collaboration that replaced the old suspicion. The new structure was taller, reinforced with advanced materials, and integrated with a more strategic drainage plan. People recognized it as an asset, not an eyesore. The county lauded it as a model for suburban flood control. Occasionally, I'd walk along the crest of the new dam at sunrise. The sky would glow with a gentle orange hue, and the reservoir's water shimmered softly beneath. That calm surface reminded me of everything that had happened. The battles in courthouses, the community uproar, the nights spent under torrential rain wondering if we'd lose everything. There were scars, both literal and metaphorical, but also a newfound resilience. One evening, while finishing the day's work, a group of residents approached me. They looked tired but determined. One of them, a single mother whose basement had been flooded, stepped forward. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You didn't abandon us. You fought for what you believed was right." A lump caught in my throat. I simply nodded. Another neighbor, a retired teacher, shook my hand. "And you did it the right way," she added, "with permits, with genuine care." Her voice carried the warmth of someone who understood the difference between tyranny and genuine leadership. We shared a quiet moment, listening to the trickle of water as it passed through the newly constructed spillway. In that stillness, I realized how simple acts of doing the right thing can ripple out, affecting people's lives for better or for worse. Karen's attempt to control everything ironically led to a near-total collapse, teaching everyone a brutal lesson in arrogance. Yet from that wreckage, we rebuilt something stronger, not just in concrete and rebar, but in understanding each other's fears and hopes. In the months that followed, the official lawsuits concluded. Insurance claims were settled, though some families needed more time to recover. The HOA was stripped of most of its powers, restructured to serve more as a volunteer neighborhood watch than a draconian governing body. And me? I continued living on that ridge, watching the seasons change. Sometimes I'd catch local kids skipping rocks near the reservoir's edge, or see a fisherman quietly casting a line at dawn. The area that once caused such division had become a place of unity. More storms came and went. The new dam endured, and the neighborhood below stayed safe. People began planting new gardens, Property values slowly rebounded. The memory of the infamous flood lingered, but it evolved into a cautionary tale about power misused and the resilience of a community that fought back. Every so often, I'd get a letter from a curious homeowner somewhere else in the country saying they'd read about my story online, asking for advice about dealing with an overbearing HOA or building a small retention pond to manage runoff. I responded graciously, providing cautionary pointers and urging them to consult professionals. If my experience could save another community from a similar fate, it might bring a small sense of justice to everything that happened. When winter finally arrived, the crisp air brought a hush over the hills. The reservoir froze at the edges, forming delicate white patterns across the water's surface. Standing on the dam's crest, I thought of how precarious life can be. So many times, we assume we can control everything: water, land, people's choices. Then nature or fate or justice steps in and reminds us that we're all part of a larger system of cause and effect. Karen learned that lesson the hard way, though it came at a steep cost for everyone involved. I never saw Karen again in person. She slipped away from the region with minimal fanfare. Rumor had it she tried to start fresh in a different state, but the overshadowing controversies in her past might have followed her. I didn't wish her ill. Part of me hoped she'd reflect on the damage her obsession with control had caused. If she ever found a path to genuine redemption, that would be between her and her conscience. I carried on with my life, focusing on the positives: the newly fortified dam, the county's interest in exploring more environmentally friendly projects, and the neighbors who still occasionally dropped by with a greeting or a loaf of freshly baked bread as thanks. Life regained its gentle rhythms. On misty mornings, I'd wake early, open my back door, and stand quietly, taking in the subtle glimmer of the reservoir below, listening to birds chatter among the oaks. It felt peaceful, the way it always should have been. And even though the scars of the flood and the fierce battles lingered in memories, the sense of unity and respect among the residents prevailed. That, in itself, was the best outcome I could have hoped for. Through all the anger, heartbreak, and legal wrangling, a deeper bond was forged, one that made the community stronger and more vigilant about who they entrusted with leadership. The HOA's new members approached their roles with caution and humility, determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Sometimes a flicker of bitterness would surface when I recalled the stress, the ruined nights of sleep, and the enormous financial costs I initially shouldered. But such feelings never lasted long. Each time they arose, I reminded myself of the ultimate victory. Not just the legal one, but the moral one. We had proven that integrity, evidence, and perseverance could stand up to manipulative power, and the environment, this precious land, finally had a layer of protection even stronger than before. Under the late winter sun, the water sparkled at the foot of the dam, reflecting a bright horizon. Time moved forward. Storms would come and go, but we stood prepared, undaunted, secure. And if ever again someone tried to tear down what we'd built, physically or metaphorically, there would be a community ready to stand firm, a network of neighbors who had learned firsthand the value of mutual respect and the consequences of unchecked authority. At last, spring arrived with delicate blossoms, and the hillside turned lush green. Children laughed as they ran through the meadows, and the thick air of tension that once cloaked the area lifted. On the final day of our reconstruction efforts, the county engineer came by to inspect the new auxiliary spillway. He was pleased. Everything met or exceeded standards. "You've done good work here," he told me quietly. "This place feels different now. More hopeful?" I gazed at the reservoir, the kids waiting by its shallow edges. "That's all I wanted," I replied, "to keep people safe and show a bit of respect for the land." He smiled, gave me a firm handshake, then left me alone with my thoughts. The sky was bright blue, dotted with drifting white clouds. A gentle breeze ruffled my hair as I took in the scene below. The neat rows of houses, each distinct yet collectively forming a tapestry of human life. They looked peaceful from up here, no longer at the mercy of a reckless decision. And in that moment, a quiet reassurance filled my heart. We'd faced the storm, faced the flawed leadership of an HOA drunk on power, and emerged on the other side wiser, more unified, and infinitely stronger. No matter what nature had in store, no matter who next rose to claim authority, we'd be ready. Together.